Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Pope Metallicus, and welcome back to another Rock and Roll Religion history episode where we are going to be diving into the origins of punk rock, the bastard son of the hard rock scene going into the 70s and 80s, and always that interesting middle ground between the more hard rock stuff and heavy metal. And always an interesting genre, not necessarily my favorite, but there's always some great acts that have come out of there. Sorry for all the technical issues. We've got my camera stopped working at the last minute, so that's always fun. But thank you guys for being here. I appreciate you all. We got Courtney in the chat and Sentinel, and of course Low Spec Linux Laptop. Thank you for being here, man. I appreciate it. And we've got a whole bunch of good stuff. Just to get some stuff out of the way, I mean, I do have a Stream Elements link in the description down below. If you guys do want to support the channel, I appreciate it very much. You guys help keep this thing going. And without further ado, let's introduce you guys to the panel. We have, as always, our laser-guided commie-killing Steel Eagle of Death, the Sentinel. How's it going, dude?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing good, man. I'm glad to be talking about punk again. It's been a while since we've covered this topic on the channel. Glad to be getting back to it. And we're going to be going through some of the real all-stars of this genre right at the beginning. So
good.
Yeah, it's always fun to do. We got, Ramones, The Clash, all the good stuff. Right. And of course, helping us do that is our resident punk fan and expert on the genre. It's Courtney's Fellowship of Oddballs. How's it going?
Hey, I don't know what an expert I am, but how's everyone doing?
You're as much of an expert as the rest of us. So.
Yeah.
More of an expert than I am. I don't know them. The history of punk, I'm kind of mid on as far as like knowing, but I do know specifically that without punk, there is no thrash metal.
Pretty much. And we'll get into that more towards the later half of the decade here. We're going to be going from like 75 to 1980.
Okay.
So like, the real origins of the genre, and like, because it kind of took off in the 80s, but it was started in like the mid to late 70s. So we'll get into a lot of that stuff. And then probably next time we'll go into the hallowed halls of the new wave of British heavy metal.
Nice.
Coming out about this same time, because this is what I wanted to do and kind of like break it out into the subgenres, because like
it kind of
started just talking like hard rock and heavy metal into the 70s and 80s, like it would just get so busy and there's so much going on that I felt like I had to break it out.
And punk and new wave of British heavy metal kind of either had sex or kind of just crossed.
Yeah, there's always been kind of a crossover between NWO, BHM stuff and punk.
When you said NWO, I'm like, new on the block. That's you said that's so fast.
Yeah, the new wave of British heavy metal.
Yeah, gotcha.
Like bands like Motorhead, Iron Maiden, Saxon.
Right.
All that kind of stuff that went on to be, legends of the genre that were pretty much getting their start right about this time.
And so, Motorhead released their first stuff in 77, right?
Yeah, they released it in 77. They were a band from 75.
There you go.
Hey, Belmont Press. Sorry, saying hi to the chat.
Hey, Belmont Press. Good to see you here.
Belmont.
And let's get our graphics up here. And start with the founders of the genre as it exists now, because throughout the late 60s and early 70s, you had bands like, the MC5 and Iggy and the Stooges and stuff like that, kind of paving the way for stuff like this. And it kind of languished in the underground for a few years, and a lot of it was kind of looked down on by the rest of the rock scene that was getting a lot more progressive and a lot more kind of artsy at this time. And then you have these four guys come out of New York and just go with that stripped down rock and roll sound that everybody kind of vibed with, and it really just blew everyone away.
They definitely simplified it, but I will still say that Iggy and the Stooges and bands like the Dead Boys, who they formed in 1975, they're still punk rock to me. But
Yeah, I mean, these guys
So-
all formed about 75.
Yeah.
Iggy and the Stooges and MC5 were earlier, and they were more like hard rock than anything else. They had
I like to
elements
call them
of
like
what
dirty
become
rock
punk.
and roll almost in a way.
Yeah,
Shout
It's got
out
that
to
like
Dee Dee.
dirty kind of sound.
Shout out to Dee Dee Ramone for rocking the Black Sabbath shirt.
yeah,
Yeah.
Got to give respect where it's due. And obviously the leather and denim that would come to exemplify not only punk but also metal going forward.
Mhm.
Kind of the unofficial uniform of the very anarchist movement that was punk, which I find hilarious that there is a kind of unofficial uniform for anything that is as freeform and as anti-establishment as punk is. Where it's like, oh yeah, do everything you want, but if you don't wear this, you're not part of the group. So it's just one of those interesting little idiosyncrasies with punk.
Okay. If I had known that, I would have worn my white Ramon shirt too, so I could have fit in better.
Right. And then, I mean, the Ramones coming out with their first album in '76, like they kind of beat everyone to the punch when it came to recording, anyway. Because I know that, like, there was a scene going in New York and even in the UK at this point of like at like CBGB and a couple of other clubs throughout the Northeast, but it
New
hadn't
York
really
CBGB.
taken off yet.
And CBGB's I was lucky enough to go to many shows there before they closed down. I was in my 20s when they shut that down.
Yeah.
Will not be called like that ever again. I don't think.
No, I mean, those things were probably barely up to code even in the '70s.
Oh,
That's why
hell.
they allowed punk bands to play there.
Yeah, they were not up to code. Neither was the Rat in Boston that I lived
Yeah,
right next
the
to.
Rat
and
the
none
Rat
of
was
them were.
notorious for a long, long time, and like legends were still told of it when I was young.
I lived next door and above it, so I used to
Okay, so
hang out.
you
in
know
back
a
of the
lot of the
Rat.
shit that used to go down there.
Oh yeah, I went to many shows there. Yep, I remember when they closed. That was a shame too. I was still in college.
Well,
when they
Los Beck, I don't know about the president, but you're all friends with the Pope, so you got that going for you. But no, these guys were absolutely the lightning rod that kind of kicked off punk's popularity in the late '70s because everyone kind of heard the first album and immediately ran with it.
They're
Because it
just so
wasn't,
much fun.
yeah, it's not complicated music to play. It doesn't require a shit ton of gear. Like
And
you
you
just
can
show up in a
be
van.
ADD as you know what I mean. The songs are so short that you don't have to really pay attention to
And
much.
depending on exactly how amped up they were, they could go anywhere from like 2.5 minutes to like a minute and a half, depending on
Yep.
what they were doing.
Also, I want to point out before I forget that Johnny Ramone's guitar playing style was a huge, huge influence on several guitar players.
Oh yeah.
And I want to specifically say James Hetfield, because James Hetfield is the ultimate metal down picker, and he gets that from Johnny.
Yeah, I
James
mean,
Hetfield, Metallica, they were huge punk fans anyway.
Mhm.
You know,
yeah,
you
not
could
only
tell from their
directly, but
covers.
through Motorhead and a couple of other bands like Venom that had picked it up from these guys.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's what I mean. Like even early on, these guys were super influential. They were kind of like Motorhead in a lot of ways, where everyone who was even around at the same time was listening to them.
And Motorhead and Joey Ramone were huge friends.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know.
Lemmy.
Lemmy and John and Joey Ramone like got each other. Like
Yeah.
they were huge friends for the remainder of their lives.
Mhm.
Because Motorhead was kind of the middle ground between punk and punk and metal.
Motorhead are considered all of that. People consider them punk. People consider them metal. People consider them rock and roll.
Yeah, and they were all three. I mean, because they're all kind of subgenres of the same main tentpole. Really, it's all rock and roll.
It's all rock and roll. At the end of the day, it's all rock and roll.
And these guys in their sound really evidence that in that they have a very 50s rock vibe going, just overdriven to hell. Where like, and a lot of their early stuff is covers of early rock and roll stuff, or at least very least, in that vein of like, kind of like songs like "I Want to Be Your Girlfriend" and stuff like that. Like that's straight up like a 50s dance hall tune, essentially.
Yeah, it's Richie Valens, basically.
Yeah, and they just put a dirtier and harder edge on it, and that kind of resonated with everybody. And then right about the same time, we'll get to them a little bit later in more detail. The UK was coming out with bands like the Sex Pistols, and the Clash were around, I believe, at this point.
Mm-hmm.
They hadn't recorded anything yet, but they were around. But I will claim it. The United States founded punk first.
Good.
With the Ramones. The Brits get heavy metal, God's music. So you know what? We can
they
punk.
They get heavy metal. We get punk.
That's just how it works. We got punk in the divorce. Sorry, not sorry.
That's funny.
But yeah, I mean, and there was a bunch of other acts that either were directly punk or were kind of considered like, in modern terms, punk adjacent, essentially, around that would mostly go on to be like new wave, like Blondie or the Pretenders and a bunch of other ones. They're all great bands. But
the Plasmatics
be identified as
punk.
Oh
my goodness, the Plasmatics.
They're fucking awesome.
Yeah, I mean, they're great bands, but I don't think they would be recognized as punk now. But at the time, like they were, brushed with that same brush, and they had some great.
They were
stuff.
In that scene, like Butcher Baby by the Plasmatics. That's a punk song.
Well, the Plasmatics are straight up punk. I'm not even gonna lie.
I mean, they had a very really metal influence, but they were they're a punk band.
Yeah, the Wendy O. Williams band was a little more metal, but I would definitely say the Plasmatics is.
Yeah, yeah, she brought a lot of the metal influence into the Plasmatics, but them themselves are straight up punk. Same with Girl School. And that's one interesting thing with punk is they had a lot of female-led bands right off the bat.
Oh yeah,
including one we're going to get to shortly here in the Runaways.
Oh yeah,
who were already kind of a thing in '76.
The Runaways, who have two of my kind of idol women, which would be Sherry Curry. Well, Lita Ford as well too, and Joan Jett, who's like one of my all-time faves.
Yeah, I mean, let's face you can't talk enough good things about Joni.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she did great with the Runaways, and it was one of really the creative influences behind that sound, and then kind of continued it with Joan Jett and the Blackhearts, and is still doing that stuff to this day. And she's for a long time, she's kind of the bad girl of rock and roll.
I'm such a girl. Sorry. I'm like, I should have worn my Runaway shirt.
And there they are with the Runaways. And they were super young at this point. Like they were like 16?
Oh, yeah. Wow. Why can't I think of his name right now? The guy that oh my gosh. The guy that formed them, that basically controlled them. It's gonna drive me crazy now.
Yeah, I don't remember his name, but their manager essentially.
Yeah, hold on. I have to look it up because it's going to make me nuts.
And there's been many a tale spun about that man.
Well, because he had a lot of bad stuff around him.
Which, is sadly not atypical in the music industry. I'm sure a lot of female artists can share the same stories, pretty much regardless of genre of like, oh yeah, a young, pretty, fairly talented singer wants to get ahead,
and
a sleazy ass manager has a perfect way to do it.
Kim Fowley was his name. Yeah, Soul got it right. As I for some reason I could not think of that name. I knew that.
Kim Fowley, there it is. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, Soul Assassin.
Hey, Soul Assassin, always good to see you here. And then I mean, the Runaways had a lot of really early hits like Cherry Bomb and a couple of other ones that really kind of ratcheted up the attention that punk was getting in the mainstream.
And it's kind of interesting. Of course they had the movie, the mainstream movie that came out about them, but they really were kind of put together as like a band, which was, it just goes to show how, I guess, I don't know, I'm not a feminist in any way, but like women were treated back then, like they were pieced together perfectly.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of that I don't think was, for like sex sells purposes. I think it was mostly that they wanted a punk band that they could control.
Yeah, like the Supremes.
Because they were punk was notorious for being completely out of control, completely resist any kind of creative creative break that you might put on them. And God knows what they're going to say when they're put in front of a microphone.
So they're basically the punk version of the Supremes.
Yeah, essentially.
Yeah. So
Where they were kind of
a bunch of like
manufactured, but
talented,
that doesn't always mean bad.
yeah, bunch of individual talents, perfectly chosen, put together, and magic.
Yeah, and
look,
they
I mean,
kind of
half of them went on to do their own thing too.
Mhm.
That's
Yeah, I mean,
know,
you
the
have
talent
Lita
that they
Ford
did have.
doing her thing with her own band, and always collaborating with Ozzy and Lemmy from Motorhead, and doing a lot of really cool stuff on that front.
I love "Close My Eyes Forever," the Ozzy. I mean, I know it's cheesy, but that's like such a great tune.
Cheesy doesn't mean bad in the 80s. Like, they understood what made like a fun song or just a good collaboration between artists that had different styles, really.
Mhm.
Yeah, and then
And-
her lyrics, you know, I went to a party that Saturday night.
Yeah.
I didn't get laid. I got in a fight. That's, come on, it's amazing.
And it kind of strikes me as like metal that your average teenage girl could listen to and identify with.
True.
The same
I
same
agree.
way that, like, you know, your average teenage boy could identify with Motley Crue at the
I
time.
got my Motley Crue poster behind me.
Yeah, but like at that time, it was like, you know, a Judas Priest or a Motley Crue who was singing about partying and having a good time and being your own person.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Like, that was kind of the soul of the whole punk movement. Is a lot of kids who came of age in the late 60s, early 70s, in like one of the most tumultuous decades politically and socially that we've ever had, at least in modern memory, and kind of trying to figure out what being an adult meant in that time period.
Yeah.
And kind of challenging all the rules that were already there.
I
And-
see self-empowerment as
Yeah.
like philosophical thread between all those genres.
That's a really good way to. That's a good word.
Self-empowerment and actualization of kind of like, I'm going to do my own thing and challenge a lot of the rules that are there just to see what works.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, later on, that would lead a lot of punk bands down a very destructive path with, you know, drugs and a lot of excess. But
I think that happens with a lot of,
it does.
of musical acts, though. But punk definitely got it was put more in the mainstream, you know, in the public eye with stuff like that.
Yeah,
because
certainly.
It was that I don't give an F attitude, you know. So
Yeah, it was
care.
basically fuck you all. I'm going to do what I want, and you know, how dare you try to stop me? Even when
Yes.
you know that person trying to stop you might have actually been trying to help. And unfortunately, later on in the 80s and 90s, that kind of lead down to a very hedonistic style of music that kind of destroyed itself over the decade. But at this point, I mean, it was really just a rebellion against everything.
Yeah.
I saw a great quote from, I forget who it was. I think it was one of the New York Dolls. Of like, you know, it all came down to like James Dean and the Wild One, where he says like, "Oh, I'm rebelling," and he's like, "Oh, against what?" And he just turns around and goes, "What do you got?"
Mhm. I was thinking of that movie, by the way, as you said that.
I wish I could remember exactly what year it was, but for my birthday, I want to say it had to have been 23 or 24. 23, 24, maybe 25. But the New York Dolls did like a reunion thing, and they played at the Trocadero, which is not a big club in Philly. And my friends got me backstage and all that stuff, so I actually got to hang out with the Dolls.
Nice.
Like the craziest thing ever. Because, you know, Buster Poindexter had already had his like solo career in the 80s and all that stuff. So pretty cool.
And like, you know, pretty much from the start, they kind of cemented themselves as kind of challenging the norms when it came to even rock and roll. Like, whether it be song structure, whether it be lyrical content, whether it be, you know, who's playing in the bands, like they were all about, if it was kind of an established rule, they went against it.
You know what? That's what a lot of people like, when a lot of people like kind of, you know, stereotype punk rock, and they're like, this is punk. It's got to be like rah, rah, rah type of thing, or, you know, this fast beat. I always tell people like, no, there's so many other bands that like punk is more of like it's anti-establishment, really, is what I that's another good.
Yeah, and for every
term for
band
it.
that did have kind of a barky, more guttural vocal style, you had another artist like Blondie or Joan Jett, who is
Mhm.
a very talented singer, just singing a little more aggressively and stuff like that, and kind of led the way for a lot of the thrash metal vocals we'd hear in the 80s.
Mm,
And
good
I
point.
mean, it's a combination of a lot of like the punk stuff coming out in about this time, and then Motorhead kind of cementing that with with Lemmy's voice.
If I will say one thing about punk is that you're right. It opened the floodgates for anyone to feel comfortable being the front man or the
Yeah,
front woman.
yeah,
Yep.
and it's kind of a anything is possible type of thing.
That's so
Like,
true.
See, punk
Nerd,
is a
whatever. I
good.
mean, any type of person. You didn't have to be like,
yeah,
I
it
don't
wasn't
know.
just it wasn't just the cool dude with a perm and a guitar in his hand that could go out and make music anymore. Like,
Right.
you too can do it. I mean, and let's face it, like the Ramones were not a complicated band. And if you listen to a lot of the people who saw their early shows, they weren't even all that good.
I saw them twice, both on their last tours, different years. they claimed they kept claiming it was their last tour.
And Soul Assassin, I don't know about that one. I mean, punk pretty basically started in New York, with the Ramones and the New York Dolls and a couple of other ones running around that scene. But she definitely brought a big eye to the genre from the public.
Yeah, I've never heard that she's recognized for that, but
And you had a lot of more like quote unquote like less hardcore, but like a lot more musically complex stuff with like Blondie or the Pretenders or Pat Benatar later in the decade and into the 80s, more with the new wave stuff that
we
would
even
kind
go
of
with
go.
like a lot of later bands members were in like these early punk bands that a lot of people haven't even heard of. Like Belinda Carlisle, she was in a band called The Bags, which was like not well known at all. Flea from the Red Hot Chili Peppers was
Yep.
in Fear. Um, there's I don't know, there's a bunch of them.
And I mean,
Pat Smear, who went on to play with Nirvana, he was in the Journey.
yeah, this was a very fluid genre, especially in terms of who was in bands at any given time. Like there was no like set lineup for a lot of it. Was very similar to the black metal scene now, where like everyone's in this band with this guy, and like they're all kind of like this one big group of musicians that all plays together, and occasionally will form a band out of it.
That's true in a lot of cases. There's a lot of there aren't a lot of punk bands that are still around that have like all original members.
No, I mean, unfortunately, in the case of a lot of punk bands, that's because a lot of them died along the way.
Right.
In the case of the Ramones, there's no original members of the band left, unfortunately.
At least they got into rock
You do have
and roll.
survivors from the bands, obviously, but all the originals are now gone.
Yeah, Marky Ramone still has I think he still does his thing. He's not OG. So
Yeah, and I mean, same thing could be said for Motorhead. I mean, you have Phil Campbell and Mickey D still making music. I know Mickey's with the Scorpions now,
Mhm.
and Mickey's doing real well with that. And Phil has his own band, and Phil Campbell and the Bastard Sons. But the original Motorhead is now gone.
I want to say that the Dickies still have all four, but
Do they really?
They have at least 3 of the 4. But I'm gonna double check that.
And we'll get
Really
to the Dickies in a
quickly.
minute because I know you have a
Yeah.
personal connection with them.
Well, with the guitarist.
Whenever I hear Dickies, all I think of is like skateboarding and what I would wear while skateboarding. Basically, it's like the Dickies
Yeah, right.
shorts or the Dickies pants that I would get at an Army surplus store.
Yep.
That was the skate look, in like the early 2000s.
I remember.
Which
I
is
used to
funny
wear
because
Dickies for work.
they were mostly like work pants for like tradesmen, and
Yeah.
none of the skateboarders had jobs.
I was in high school. Junior high. I forget.
I worked in high school. I didn't have a choice though.
I just like shitting on the skateboard scene because it's funny.
Hey, if I hadn't gotten into skateboarding, I probably would have a good right ankle right now. So
Yeah, that's
fuck
fine.
skateboarding.
I was a skater too, so I wasn't a good skater, but I definitely did it my whole life.
I could only ollie like half of a fucking centimeter of a centimeter. I could only
That's the only thing I could do.
yeah.
Or tic tac, but that was like 80s. Like that's like the stuff that we thought was cool when we were kids.
Meanwhile, I just skated the normal way, on ice.
So
like-
Ice skating.
Because
Oh, hockey.
I grew up in
Hockey.
a frozen hell.
My mom used to take us ice skating on a pond. And when I think about it now, I'm like, that pond was not always frozen.
Well, I mean, there were ways you could tell how thick the ice was because we used to
My
play
mom
pond
was-
hockey all the time growing up.
Yeah. Well, you were further north, so
Yeah,
Where we were.
Pennsylvania gets some pretty deep freezes and stuff like that too. So
sometimes.
yeah,
We're
but New
not
England
Philly that
winters-
much.
New England winters are different.
yeah,
Very
we're just built different.
Oh gosh, I remember my brother who was living in Colorado at the time came to visit me in Boston when I lived there, and he said he had never been so cold in his life. And I was like, "You live in Colorado?" He's like,
Yeah,
"No,
yeah,
this is different."
we don't get a ton of snowfall, but we get that bitter Canadian cold that comes in the winters.
Yeah.
Especially in Vermont. Jesus, the 2 years I spent up in Vermont, the winters were absolutely god awful. But no, I mean, in New York too, to a larger extent. But yeah, this was kind of the original incarnation of punk that kind of drove everything forward. And like most genres, it didn't, like, the initial style didn't last all that long, but it was super influential on everything that came later. Because like a lot of things like got a lot more complicated and a lot more out there later, but they started off pretty pretty simple.
Hi, Fizz.
Hey Fizz, good to see you, man.
Hey, Fizz.
And going into, a little more of it, have bands like this with the Sex Pistols that again weren't around very long. They only did what, the one album?
The Sex Pistols. Well, John Lydon went on to do a whole
Well,
bunch
yeah, I
of
mean, he was in a bunch of different
stuff.
stuff, but I think the Sex Pistols by themselves only lasted for like a year.
Jesus,
Sid Vicious.
really?
Yeah, I think they only had the
Was,
one
uh,
album.
Sid Vicious also just kind of took over their fame. You know what I mean? So it
Yeah.
was like,
And self-destructed shortly thereafter.
yeah.
Because I remember seeing video of them where they were on Top of the Pops once and then never again.
Okay.
There's so
Have
many
you
good
heard this
bands on top of
story?
the pops.
Okay. Have you heard the story that when the Sex Pistols met the Ramones had already pissed in the Sex Pistols beer? Have you heard of this?
I'm kind
I
of
have
not
never
surprised
heard of
at
that, but
to be
that's
honest with you.
amazing.
I swear to God, I read this. I read this in like this little book. It was a Metallica book that had like a bio of it, and they were talking about the pre-scene that Metallica was like inspired by, and part of that was this story of the Ramones pissing in the beer of the Sex Pistols. Swear to God.
That sounds
amazing.
very, very punk to me.
Amazing.
And it was a very similar style, but the music was very different.
Yeah, well, that's what I was saying before. Like, a lot of there's no like set musical style. I try and tell people that. I mean, as with every other thing, there's like a million subgenres, but you like if you listen to bands like there's an all girls band that was UK that was before the 80s called the Smiths. They were not punk sounding in any way of what you guys would think of punk, like Ramones or like this. They were more kind of like this, I don't even know, kind of reggae influence, which a lot of the Clash were and stuff like that too. But
Yeah.
A lot, because punk especially in the UK, it either goes into new wave or it goes into goth.
Yeah.
goth, or it goes everywhere. I feel like.
Bauhaus, Susie and the Banshees, stuff like that.
But it did it did in the States too. A lot of people just don't realize it as much. Like the Dead Boys, Stiv Bators went on to form Lords of the New Church, and they had that goth sound, kind of we're like synth pop, 80s synth pop kind of goth.
Yeah.
That's what I usually call it, synth pop. But
And then,
There were-
in Europe, it would kind of go on to found the core of industrial metal later on into the 90s.
I like it.
Kind of that goth rock kind of synth inspired
Ministry, stuff like that.
Ministry, Rammstein.
Type of negative. Who else?
Yeah, type of
Pig-
Pig
negative.
Face.
Yeah.
Do you guys remember Pig Face?
And in terms of the attitude, it definitely went into the black metal scene quite a bit. especially early on with bands like Venom, where it was basically just extremely heavy punk.
Three guys just playing as loud and as fast and just writing the most like fucking shocking lyrics. they
And trying to
possibly
be as outrageous as possible, which was kind of very similar to the Sex Pistols in a lot of ways.
could. It was shock rock, but it was a themed shock rock, which was
Yeah,
with the Sex
and
Pistols. It was just kind of like an animal, a wild animal. You never knew what you were gonna get. On
yeah,
any given day.
it could be raunchy, it could be satanic, it could just be fast and aggressive. You never really knew. You knew it was going to piss your parents off.
Or piss whoever was interviewing them off.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, there's that one interview with them is amazing.
Oh yeah, was it the BBC interview with the Sex
Yeah, I
Pistols?
forget what show that was. Yeah, or whatever. But yeah, that's
where
so
Johnny
funny.
has a Nazi armband on.
Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of did not set the tone for them being popular in the mainstream media.
But isn't unpopularity in the mainstream like a definitive embrace of the "fuck you"? I'm gonna do what I want. Don't.
Pretty much.
So I think that was like let's say he didn't believe that, right? Because are we talking about Johnny Rotten, right?
Yeah, 'cause I don't think he never really showed any,
Any Nazis.
tendencies or anything
Johnny
like that.
Rotten in the last 2 years has written stuff like on Twitter or in interviews where he was like, "Wow, I can't believe all of the rebels that I saw around me, so to speak, just easily conform immediately when COVID came in and stuff like that, and freedoms
Yep.
were being taken away."
That was one of those moments I knew punk was pretty much dead as a movement, was when you had like quote unquote punk bands that were
Yes.
requiring vaccines to come to their shows. It's like,
Yes.
Well, I think it was dead before then. I always say it's like, to me, Green Day kind of
yeah,
was,
I mean, there
in
was
my
that.
eyes, like the death of it, because that's when punk really started selling out. Like in my I guess, when I was old enough to realize,
Yeah, I
and
mean,
see
like
it
I was still in
happening.
high school up to like American Idiot. I think that was one of the first shows I ever went to.
Yeah, see, I was like I lived through that cusp of like where, like when I was in 9th and 10th grade, I still got called a freak for dyeing my hair and for wearing combat boots. I
Yeah,
was
good
called a
stuff. How's
Nazi.
it going, dude?
They're Doc Martens. And then all of a sudden that stuff became popular and everyone was doing it and it wasn't a big thing anymore. So like we got bitter, people that were kind of like
Yeah, right.
before that. Hey, good stuff.
It's like in hindsight, like I know that was like the death knell for punk. Like the last time it was even slightly popular. Although early Green Day stuff still had a point to make, and they did it. But after a while, it was just like, wow, really?
Well,
we're going there?
I understand when you grow up and you do want to make money and whatnot, but it just went against the.
Yeah.
Don't call yourself punk then, I guess.
Yeah, it was basically like, if you're going to be that, like, you're alternative rock, you're not punk. Don't try.
It's something different, to be honest, because like Green Day is very pop, very, very cutesy, I would say, and punk.
Yeah, very socially acceptable punk, which sounds like a contradiction in terms.
It's like if punk is the bitter pill, Green Day is the bitter pill covered with a little bit of sugar or syrup to make the medicine go down easier, so to speak.
Well, they're mainstream. They became.
Yeah, and the same thing happened to metal in the 80s, where you had all the glam bands come in and kind of dilute the message and the sound a lot. And
I still like that stuff though, because I was a little kid.
some of it's good, some of it's really good, and most of it, unfortunately, is
I just didn't know better then.
Poison for me, but like if I were to say, I would say a little bit of Poison, but like I did not like.
I have a personal thing with Poison.
I
got to hang out with
rock out to some Dolphin on a regular basis and stuff like that because they were good. And Motley Crue to a large extent too.
They were all musicians. They were all great musicians in Poison. Just the funny thing is, I just never liked the songs they wrote.
Yeah, and well, I mean, the punk scene kind of did. Good Stuff brings up the '80s death metal scene. That's kind of where a lot of the attitude went.
Celtic Frost.
Yeah, they all went into the black and death metal scene in the 80s and 90s. where they just kind of went away, unfortunately. I mean, because you had like Henry Rollins, who started off in Black Flag, who we'll get to in a minute, and then kind of went on with Rollins Band, and then kind of just did and kind of petered out in the '90s and went into comedy.
His spoken word, he used to preach a lot.
And he's a funny bastard too when he wants to be.
Oh, he's funny now, but like he used to be really more like serious and preachy.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen interviews with him about not only his intro to Black Flag, but also like other members of the band talking about him. And like, he was very much a very serious, very straightforward, kind of straight-laced kind of guy. And they kind of had to break him of that, put him in Black Flag. It's like where he learned to like not take himself too seriously.
It's funny. I was not really a fan of him. Like, look, Good Stuff Just Wrote was not a fan of Henry Rollins' spoken word. Yeah. I wasn't a fan of him because of that. Back in like the '90s and stuff, I was kind of like, this guy sucks. But he was in Black Flag. But you know, when I listen to some of it now, you know, I can respect some of it now. I was just, I don't know. You know, when you're a teenager.
Yeah, it was just kind of like, what is this? This isn't like.
He would just be on stage though, like barefoot and like preaching. Like he was like, I don't know. He reminded me of like my dad lecturing me or something. Sometimes.
Oh, fuck that shit. Yeah, I would start throwing fucking bottles.
No, I didn't have a really normal dad, so I guess that's why.
We kind of talk about this in a lot of the black metal stuff with Imperatus, where the third wave bands kind of started taking the whole we worship the devil thing way too seriously.
Mm-hmm. Like, what would you like? Burzum? But that's
that's second wave. So like more like towards the late '90s, early 2000s.
Gotcha.
Like a lot of them started to kind of like believe the hype and kind of take themselves a little too seriously.
Mayhem.
And like the first two waves, you're sitting there looking at them like, bro, we were kind of joking. It was like kind of a tongue-in-cheek sarcasm.
It was entertainment.
A lot of the later ones just didn't translate into.
It was Vincent Price on fucking crack, basically.
Yeah. I like that you say it's entertainment because I like shock value in comedy, in everything. Like nothing's acceptable anymore. You know, the PC police took over with everything, I feel like. But I just like, I don't know, even myself, like, you know, when I'm in YouTube chats or on channels and stuff, I say totally inappropriate things that I don't believe in. I just say it to be shocking. You know what I mean? And to be funny. Yeah, exactly. To be funny. But there are people that don't think it's funny.
I do the same thing.
And we were talking about it a couple of weeks ago with Alice Cooper, where that's kind of where some of the stage presence of a lot of this came from in the attitude.
Alice Cooper's playing tonight.
In 72, 73, this man was on everyone else was just kind of out there with a light rig and maybe a couple of, lights or maybe a couple of candles to set the stage. And this man's out there cutting his own head off every fucking night. So like, and even with the leather and the mascara and a lot of that, he kind of had a huge influence on punk just by kind of existing in that, even though he was never the heaviest guy out there, and he wasn't really the most, rebellious guy.
He plays golf and stuff. He's so funny when you see him in real life.
He himself is not that out there as far as an individual. When you see him on stage, you'd never fucking know it.
Yeah, but see, that's kind of what I mean. Like when I say, like, when I act a certain way on YouTube or whatever, like I always tell people, like I play a character.
And he himself,
exactly, and that's what Alice Cooper does. Yeah, he actually said, when I'm on stage, I am fully Alice. I am fully into the character.
Yeah, it's like Alice Cooper is a character, the same way, like, especially you old school wrestling fans, the same way Hulk Hogan or Macho Man is a character that they play.
Right.
In Macho Man's case, Randy took it like way too far in a lot of cases and would act like that like basically anytime he was on camera. But but that was him just kind of almost method acting, getting into that headspace and becoming the Macho Man in the same way that Johnny Ramone would become Johnny Ramone when he was on stage. That's not how he is normally. And
absolutely. I agree with that.
Like, because like these guys are, when they're on stage, they're all angry, fucking, complete lunatics when they're on stage. And then after, if you have a beer with them after, they're completely chill dudes. Like they're just there to have a good fun.
And Johnny Rotten, John Lydon, however, whatever, that's the name I still call him because that's his name. But he's super intelligent. you know,
Yeah,
but
he's a
he'll
very
act
smart guy.
ignorant as that, you know, as fuck on stage and stuff like that. So sorry, I keep forgetting like which streams I'm on, if I'm allowed to curse or not. I like
Go for it. I certainly do.
censor myself. I can't censor
That's
myself
actually
ever. What
funny
am
you
I doing?
mentioned that, Courtney, because before King Diamond became like a metal vocalist or rock vocalist, he was a chemist.
Yeah, that's amazing. I saw them. That was fun.
And the cool part with him too is especially like he's like I said, like the King Diamond, you know, persona is a character. Like he himself is a really nice guy.
Yeah.
It's like, and then he goes on stage.
Well,
And Lemmy said
his
it best,
voice.
like, you know, you don't go to a rock show to see your next door neighbor. Go to see a being from another fucking planet.
Yeah, you
That's
go
funny
see
because
a
I saw
fight.
them with Motorhead. So
There you go.
yeah.
That sounds like a great lineup, actually.
Yeah, I
I'd
saw
watch
them in
that show.
DC. I want to say it was like either the 930 Club or yeah, it was the 930 Club. I think it was.
Nice.
I think Black Cat. I think was a smaller club.
But
I
no, I
don't know.
mean, like,
Those years get a little confused. Like they blur together. Sometimes I have to look it up and be like, okay, this one was. That's the one I was at.
yeah, and in doing the research for this show, like even just determining a start point was hard enough because like again, just like rock and roll in the first episode, it kind of all just conglomerated out of a bunch of different scenes that somebody just kind of smashed together and see what came out of it. And you know, we ended up with punk, and like I just selected the Ramones as a start point because it's pretty universally recognized, and that's where like most people can point to and go, that's punk rock.
You know, one of the things about punk that I also want to add, like where I say, like, you know, people used to say like punk's like a lifestyle or it's an attitude, whatever. I personally even can relate to that. Like if you look at the backgrounds, like I've read Johnny Rotten's book, it's called No Irish, No Blacks, No Dogs. And it talks about how he was treated as a kid, you know, like hard times they went through. A lot of these a lot of people that got into punk did not have easy childhoods or came from broken homes or stuff like that. And back when I was getting into punk, that's how it was. Like the whole scene was just a bunch of people coming from all different walks of kind of fucked up life that had a place to go be themselves.
Yeah, and you know, in
Disenfranchised.
personal life, it's kind of tragic, but in terms of artistic expression, it kind of led to this massive well of creativity that they all kind of drew on because they all had a shared background, but kind of all had their own story that they could kind of add
Yeah,
their own little
it's true.
spin on it.
Yeah, because none of us were the same. Like I think about it back then, like how there were so many. We used to joke around as like punk went on. Like as I got older, like you would like punk points. Like you know, people said you had to dress a certain way and like look a certain way, and it's like this isn't what it was about to begin with. Like when I first.
And like I said, like we have like kind of an
It was
unofficial
skaters,
uniform.
everyone together. You know what I mean? It wasn't like you had to have like studs on your jacket and colored hair necessarily, like or have a mohawk to be punk.
Yeah, and it was kind of like this quote unquote unofficial uniform of a genre that would deride the concept of that very thing.
Yep, it's true. And really, that was like the street punk look, like exploited kind of, or like you know, exploited stuff like that. But it brought a wave of.
Sort of like advertising, in a sense.
Yeah.
You're advertising. Yeah, I love punk. Come and talk to me about punk.
One of my favorite things about like you know the underground punk scene was always, especially growing up in Boston, seeing all the little band stickers and stuff like that were slapped on like stop signs and freaking power transformers and all that all over the city.
That's so funny because you're a little younger than me. That was like my era. Like a lot of the bands that I was friends with when they were first coming about, like I mean, they're huge now. Dropkick Murphys, bigger than life.
Oh yeah, I mean, I was a
the
kid.
Casualties.
Yeah,
they're
I was
not from
a kid
Boston.
When the Murphys really started out in like 97, 98.
Yeah, I saw their first show at the Rat. They played with my ex-boyfriend's band at the time, and they were like, people were like, "Who are these guys?" Like preaching they're from the streets of Boston. They're townies from Charleston, you know. So people were like,
you will get a little bit of that kind of tribalism, like you know. Especially among the Irish neighborhoods in Boston, like, what are you talking about? You're from the streets of Boston. You're like you're from Charlestown.
But like the Casualties or like the Unseen, like they were all just my age, and they were just bands doing whatever. That it's that wave that kind of took off. I kind of say they became like the Warped Tour kind of like band.
Yeah, in some ways they lost a lot of the punk edge to them after their first couple of records. But we'll probably do their own rock and roll religion on them because I've been a fan of them for a lot of years.
Which band are we talking about? The
The
Dropkicks?
Murphys.
Oh yeah, Dropkicks are a different entity. Like the Unseen and the Casualties are more. They've more stayed kind of like that street punk. The Casualties are just still going and going, which is crazy.
And I got a lot of respect for bands like that just kind of keep going, even though they're in the underground and they're never really gonna break into like the mainstream like a lot of the other bands did. Like they just keep doing what they do. And
the Casualties
there's a lot of authenticity to be found there.
It's insane, like how big they are in other countries and stuff.
It's funny, like certain genres of music just vibe differently in different places. Like a buddy of mine was in a black metal band, Ashen Wings, in Boston, and they never really went anywhere. They had a couple of songs up on YouTube, and he was at a metal festival in Finland because he moved there for work, and somebody in the crowd recognized him.
Yeah, isn't that cool?
He's like, "You're so from Ashen Wings." He's like, "Yeah, how the fuck do you know that?"
Because they're from outside the United States. That's the thing. The people in the United States don't give a fuck about, our kind of music. It's a European.
They used to. It depends on what, like, I talk about the cusp. Like I was before the cusp, because I can tell you that I sound like I'm tooting my own horn, but like I'll just give an example because of like bands that I played in and because of the weekly punk night that I used to do. My ex took me to this bar in Denver called Sancho's, and it was a Grateful Dead bar. He took me there to like as a punishment kind of thing because I made him go see an Unseen show when they were in town. He's like, "We're gonna go here," and I walked in and there was Megadeth was playing with Mastodon,
nice,
I think, across the street, and High on Fire. And so the whole bar was a bunch of rockers, like metalheads, punks, rockers. I walk in, I'm like, "This is a Grateful Dead bar, okay?" And we sit down, and the guy next to me is like, "Aren't you down in Flames punk night?" Like we used to have that all the time. I had people that knew me when I went to like Holidays in the Sun in Europe and stuff like that. So it used to be a lot tighter knit. I think now with the internet, it got a little different because everything's so accessible. Like back before the internet, I don't know. It's hard to explain. Sorry, Good Stuff just totally threw me off. I'm ADD. He's like, "Love High on Fire." They're playing on Halloween in my town. Good Stuff. That's what I play to it. Matt from High on Fire was sitting next to me with when I got recognized in this.
I think I can name the year that was. Was it 2008? If that happened?
Yeah, it was. It was absolutely because I moved to Colorado in 2007, and that was like the next year. That would have been 2008. They played at it's either Ogden Fillmore or it's the one on Colfax that's right at Colfax, right across from Sancho's.
I know because the Megadeth had the Gigantour in 2008, and High on Fire was one of the supporting acts.
Yeah, it was High on Fire.
I specifically went there to see Children of Bodom. So.
You know what? Mastodon may not have been playing. I might be wrong about that, but the guy that recognized me was his name's Darren, and his he was the guitar tech for Mastodon. I knew him kind of. So maybe I might be getting confused about the Mastodon playing, but High on Fire was playing because Matt Pike was sitting right there next to us at the bar. And that's how I met him. I was like, "I love your band. You guys are," I was like, "Wait, Megadeth is playing?" I was like all excited. And all night we stayed at this hotel where we always used to stay.
It was a little bit of a different year for me. I was busy that entire year. I joined the Marine Corps in February of that year and spent most of the rest of the year in training.
Yeah, that's definitely a different experience. I was still kind of going to shows and stuff. I moved to Colorado, but I was still going to Denver a lot. That was before I disappeared, I like to say, into being a wife.
For me, that was like the golden age of, going to concerts because A, you could still afford to go to see your band, and B, all of the bands that kind of broke up in the late 80s, early 90s got back together and started touring again and successfully started putting out new albums that were well received. So you got to see, the Iron Maidens, the Judas Priests,
Yeah, that was kind of like the start of the comeback of heavy metal in a lot of ways because like throughout the early 2000s, they just weren't around. And then by
a lot of that.
By like 2007, 2008, most of them were either back together and recording new material.
Yeah. 2007 specifically, I remember reading in Revolver the history of thrash, the section on the history of thrash. And I think even Kirk Hammett said the fact that we're still talking about thrash metal all these years later speaks volumes to the longevity of the music, to be honest.
Yeah, and well, it's funny that Kirk Hammett would say that, considering his band is one of the ones that nobody wants around and is still here.
I just saw an interview with I cannot think of his name now. It started with an A, but I think he was in Venom. It's the guy they say like
Oh, Abaddon?
invented.
They're
Yeah,
guitar player.
they say he invented thrash metal, right?
I
Or
mean,
something.
I would argue Judas Priest in '77 with Dissonant Aggressor, but Venom was certainly one of the early ones.
Yeah, maybe he claims that he like came up with the term or something. I was just watching an interview
Maybe.
about that on another YouTube
He
channel. It was interesting.
he certainly had an impact on the guitar style for a lot of thrash bands. I know James Hetfield has credited him a couple of times. A couple of
So
other guys like Jeff Hanneman from Slayer, definitely. Especially if you listen to early stuff like Black Magic, it's like, yeah, you guys were listening to some Venom. Can't lie.
Yeah.
Soul Assassin says I might want to think about writing a book.
Hole.
I've thought about it, Soul, by the way, because I have some stories.
That would be
I do.
actually really cool.
Like
'cause you get a lot
Slayer,
of-
I have a story with that. I got to see them play in Bam Margera's backyard. I also got to see them in
Holy
Rhode Island.
shit! That's
Yeah, I was-
awesome.
That was on Viva La Bam. It was pretty freaking cool. I saw them at what was the club called in Providence, Rhode Island.
Is it the one that burnt down?
Yeah. Was it the knitting,
Oh,
knitting
was it?
factory, maybe? Or am I getting confused? All I know is it's right near where I got my first tattoo, which was Art Freak. It was near you could walk there from the center little, where you took the train in.
Yeah, I think that was the Station nightclub. That was the one that burnt down when Great White was playing there.
No,
yeah.
it's not that same one, though.
It's not-
No,
not
that's
the
not
same
where I
one?
saw him. Mm-mm. I think it was the knitting factory, but I could be wrong. I could be getting, like, as I said,
Yeah,
my
there's
memory
a couple.
is-
There's a couple of little rock clubs.
I can picture it all. Like, I can picture I could walk there from where you get off the train from
Right.
Boston.
It's funny because Viva La Bam was based on Bam Margera, who got famous for his CKY videos. And the CKY
That's my
videos-
area where I grew up. Those are all they're all from my area. I was personally invited to that show, like to see them because I knew like Bam used to come into my old punk night. I used to do like a weekly Turbo Yugen night for like, you guys know what that is. You're into metal probably. And like in Philly, it was weird because Bam was a skater and all the guys that he hung out with, they're all, and Bloodhound Gang, Soul Assassin is bringing up in the chat. They're all Westchester kids. They're all like from about half an hour outside of Philly. And my dad lived in Westchester for a while. So it was all just a tight knit scene, but they were all skaters.
Mhm.
And Bam wasn't a celebrity. Like he would come into bars, like he would go into Tattooed Moms on South Street. Nobody would make a big deal out of him. He would come into my night at Club 218. Nobody would make a big deal. He was just person there, But then meanwhile, he has this like huge thing going on.
Right? Like, outside of your hometown, you're a celebrity, and inside your
Yeah.
little bubble, you're just bam.
That must suck.
He's a
because,
guy. He's here.
Like,
So
the
Assassins is
skateboarding
cool.
videos. Yeah.
Sorry, I was going to say, since Viva La Bam was a dope show, he was almost out of high school. Oh my gosh, I feel so old, Soul. Jeez, thank you for that.
I graduated in 05, so I was
I was
I
living
remember
in Boston,
CK Wire.
starting
That was-
college in '96. So I'm only 45
CK
though.
Wire. That was back when channels like MTV still had actual worthwhile content on.
Jackass, when Jackass first came out.
Yep,
It's so funny.
Jackass before they got really really weird.
And Jackass was based on the CKY
KY,
videos
yep.
that Bam Margera and his friends
And
start.
Big Brother stuff. Yeah, like there's
Yeah.
a whole bunch of, yep. And they all used to just skate at Love Park, which was where people were allowed to skateboard before Mayor John Street in Philadelphia banned skateboarding and they had to build FDR underneath 95. I've got the tattoo from Love Park because we used to hang out there. That was like our thing. They
I
all were
watched-
just skaters.
Go ahead, Courtney. I'm sorry for interrupting.
No, go on. I wanted to hear what you were going to say.
I was going to say all of like the Toy Machine skateboard company
my God.
videos.
That's so funny. Toy Machine.
Like Bam was on. I think Bam was on Toy Machine at one point. I know Jamie Thomas was on just like all these old skateboard people I remember. And skateboarding and music is so interconnected with me because
Oh yeah.
skateboarding.
Well, we've still like if you look at like McRad, that was a big skate punk band. Chuck Treese, he still hangs out in Philly. He used to come to my night too. That was their drummer. And McRad actually played my punk night back in like the early 2000s. They're all still chilling. Like all those skateboarders, like there's a lot of them that got famous from Philly, like Kerry Getz, Stevie Williams. Kerry Getz has a skate shop right off of South Street still to this day now. It's pretty cool. But it was just like, it was a close scene back then. You know what I mean? Like everyone, I guess it was the age, you know? They were all my age pretty much. So.
They kind of outlawed skateboarding. I mean, I walked into an endodontist's office the other day, like several months ago, and they had this like really nice inclined, you know, like pipe that you would a skater would love to like, you know, fucking do a grind on. Even at this fucking endodontist office in the most random fucking place in the East Bay of the San Francisco Bay Area, they had those little metal pieces that they would weld on to the thing.
Yep.
They killed it.
Yeah, I remember when it was. I remember when they started banning skateboarding everywhere. That's like that. I was like lived through that era because I just remember like, people would go take down the no skateboarding signs. You know what I mean? Like really quick, so they could skate so that people wouldn't know. And then,
it's a wonder that punk and skate and the skate culture went so well hand in hand. They tried to ban both of them and succeeded in neither.
I knew this guy. We weren't friends at all, but I knew this guy who was a really great skateboarder, and he started a band called the Muckruckers.
Okay, I've heard of that band.
Oh yes, so he was the lead singer.
Okay, that's cool. I've heard of them. I don't know about them, but I've heard of the Muckruckers, definitely.
Yeah, their first album. I mean, I didn't like the music, but it fucking had quality to it. They were solid written songs, nice production, you know, stuff like that. So the punks and the Heschers and you know they are all interconnected more than
See, my high school was just different. It was a public school, but it was in a very it was in a suburb right outside of Philly that was affluent. Like all the sports stars kids went there and stuff. So I never really hung out with people from my high school. My dad lived in the city. My mom lived right outside the city where I went to high school, and I spent my weekends in the city. So I was more like that. I had friends there, you know, like more in the punk scene, but my school was lame. I just want to address the chat if you don't mind for a second, because there's some good stuff going on. And good stuff in the chat too. With Soul Assassin's talking about Bad Religion, which I might make you show my short in a little bit because Soul Assassin, I recently sang on stage with a backup band. It was for a punk rock karaoke thing, and it's a band that tours, and it's the guitarist from the Dickies. It's Greg Hetson, who was in the Circle Jerks and Bad Religion, a couple other people, and that's interesting that he brings it up. And then
and speaking
good
of
stuff
Dickies,
is bringing up suicidal tendencies.
Right, suicidal tendencies is my kind of stuff.
Sorry.
But yeah, this is an early picture of the Dickies right here.
Oh my gosh. Okay, where's Stan? That's Stan right in the second, like the third, sorry, right in the middle.
So
I should say.
Dead center. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, he's their guitarist. And the funny thing is, the way that I met him, you guys are going to laugh. Well, I had met them before, actually, in the airport randomly. I had gone to see them the night before in Worcester, actually, at the Palladium in Worcester, Mass.
Oh yeah, I was
flying back to Philly.
Familiar with the Palladium.
Yeah, and they played this kind of little tiny punk festival the night before, and I was going back to Philly the next day. And they were playing Philly the next day, and our flight was delayed, and I was in the airport with them, and I was wearing a Dickie shirt that I had bought the night before, and I'm in the area with them. So I had technically met them before, but more recently, I was introduced to Stan through Pokemon Go, which I
really
not ashamed to say. Yeah, I knew nothing about Pokemon. I'm too old. I didn't know Pokemon came out when I was 20 or something. Bye, good stuff. He subbed. Cool, sweet. But yeah, my girlfriend Ginger, who's in this like all girl Clockwork Orange-esque themed, like they dress Clockwork Orange or whatever, Clockwork style, called the Drugettes. She was like, "You play Pokemon Go?" She's like, "So does Stan from the Dickies." She's like, "I'm gonna connect you two," and that's how we started talking. Like we messenger each other all the time about Pokemon. And the whole reason I went to the show where they called me up on stage, I was not planning on singing. I got totally like thrown to the wolves, but was because we had a lucky trade to do with Pokemon.
Nice.
It's so stupid. Yeah, that's how. It's
But no,
funny.
these guys like they were around from the early days. They didn't really produce anything until later in the 80s. But like they were
They were
formed-
around since 77, I think. I want to say 77 or God, I wish I. They're so Stan's so busy. I'm like, I always want to get them.
They're one of those bands I'd point to as a band that kind of just had their own little thing going and then got famous rather than started a band, recorded an album, and then skyrocketed to success. Like they were always kind of around and then recorded stuff later.
Well, and they got big later too with like shows like Yo Gabba Gabba
Yep.
and Soul says this is a Pokemon is punk.
Yep,
Pokemon.
Pokemon.
You'd be surprised how many people play older people, like my
Just
age
try-
and older.
Diss tracks.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. But yeah, but the Dickies and then they did that Banana Splits cover, which everyone like recognized. Like na 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 na. That one. Sorry, that was way off the pitch, but yeah, I saw them a whole bunch of times. I loved that band. They were more what people would call poppy nowadays, but
Yeah.
they were
I
just
think that's because like punk kind of took two directions in the 80s. Like you had like the more poppy stuff, like Blondie or Joan Jett or something like that. And then you had the more hardcore stuff like Black Flag and those guys. So it was kind of like, which direction do you want to go? Because they're
and
both
the Circle Jerks, which were pretty. Which is funny because Greg Hedson, who went on to be, well, he's not currently in Bad Religion, but he was in Bad Religion. Like those two are totally different too. Bad Religion and the Circle Jerks were very
you'd be hard pressed to find two more different sonic bands in the same genre. But that was kind of the thing right off the bat with punk. Like you had like straight ahead rock and rollers like the Ramones, and then you had some of the more experimental stuff with like Susie and the Banshees and a whole bunch of other stuff.
Love Susie. I met Susie and Budgie at Newbury Comics on
Nice.
Newbury Street.
Cool.
Yeah, I have so many I got to meet so many people during this like rare time of. It really was. It was like 96 to like. I'd say like 2005 probably for me.
Yeah, and it was a really cool era for this. Like even if I don't like really enjoy the music all that much, like Susie and the Banshees, I'm not a huge fan of musically, but it was really cool to see like this experimentation of like there are no more rules. Let's just go out and play some stuff and see what happens.
Mhm.
And then the sound kind of gelled on its own very organically as you go into like late 70s, early 80s.
Guess where I first heard Susie and the Banshees?
Where's that?
Batman Returns.
Yeah.
Yeah?
That's amazing.
Shit, they were on that soundtrack. That's right.
scene with Michael Keaton and Michelle Pfeiffer where they're dancing in the costume ball. That's Susie and the Banshees.
Yeah, I forgot that. Yeah,
That's
you're
funny.
right.
I saw that in the theaters. 89, right?
Yeah. Batman Returns was 91?
92.
91? Oh, 92, yeah.
Oh, I'm getting confused. I did
Yeah, the
not see that
original
one in
was
the
89.
theater. I saw the original in the theater. But I know the scene you're talking about. I saw that movie, but I did not see that in the theater.
Still one of the best incarnations of Batman on film.
Yes.
The only one I'd say was better would be the animated series from when we were kids.
I wouldn't disagree.
Because let's face it, Kevin Conroy is the voice of Batman. I will hear no arguments to the contrary.
I can debate that, but I will allow it.
Yeah, that's one of those, like, he's just so iconic. Maybe it's because it's the Batman I grew up with. And Mark Hamill's Joker was absolutely phenomenal.
That is the Joker. I mean, there's so much of the animated series was like took its DNA from what Burton had kind of had the blueprint of.
Yeah, and a lot of it came
way,
from the comics, from the Art Deco style to a lot of how the characters look and stuff like that. All came straight out of the early comics.
It was like a perfect. It's like that's what makes it sort of the definitive adaptation of Batman. It was like the perfect, all of the right ingredients.
Yeah, it was the amalgamation of all of the different incarnations of Batman kind of in this one package,
Perfectly
and written and done very, very well.
Yeah, perfectly executed. Yep.
And the Superman series that was on alongside it was pretty damn good too.
That actually is super underrated. I
never appreciated it as much as a kid because I was always much more of a fan of like the Marvel stuff.
Mhm.
And then I stumbled across the Superman series not too long ago and rewatched it, and wicked underrated series.
I love Tim Daly as Superman, and I love Lois Lane. That's the best version of Lois Lane.
Yeah,
Not
absolutely.
the actress name.
But that trilogy of like Superman and Batman the animated series leading into Justice League was
Oh my god!
peak
And then
DC
Justice League
animation.
Unlimited. I could go on and on. Yeah. I hear you, man.
It's a shame that show that DC apparently didn't understand that that's what people wanted.
I mean, the blueprint was right there, you know.
Right, and it was super popular. Even when we had like some of the more out there characters like the Question or Booster Gold, people loved it.
Or the Condiment King.
Yeah,
from Batman the Animated Series, you'd never see that.
Yeah, I mean, nowadays you'd never see that on stage or on film because nobody knows who they are except the comic book fans, like the Toy Maker.
Right.
When are you going to see him in the DCE or DC, cinematic universe? And Soul Assassin, there's absolutely zero way that Lobo was not inspired by Lemmy. He even has the mutton chops. I mean, like and he came out in the 80s, I want to say. Like when he was introduced in the comics. But absolutely true. And Motorhead was kind of alongside this whole thing, just kind of doing their thing. And their first album was actually much more punk influenced than the later stuff.
It really was.
With songs like the title track or White Line Fever and stuff like that. Like it's very punk.
I also like how, I'm just paying attention to like all this, like if you think about all these, there's punk, there's like the comic book scene, there's the skateboard scene, all these people, like, I love how all these different subcultures, that's really what it all comes down to. You know what I mean? We all get along.
Yeah, because we all have like common points of reference, especially
yeah,
music,
we all didn't fit in.
Like
we can relate to something.
I mean, yeah, and like the rock scene is kind of like that, where like even if you're a hardcore metalhead or punk or are into more like the blues rock stuff, we all have common points of connection that we can all point to as like yes. Like,
I love all music, and a lot of those styles you said specifically, they all come from some sort of pain or suffering or whatever, and I think that's what I can relate to. And art, all sorts of art and stuff like that usually does.
Like every rock fan, regardless of what their chosen subgenre is, like you throw some Jimi Hendrix on for them, they'll sit there and love it.
Fuck yes. Hey,
same thing with Motorhead. Like pretty much regardless of where you come from, everyone listens to Motorhead.
Yep. Chase is better than The Catch.
Oh God, it's still one of the best bass lines of all time.
Oh yeah. Fuck yeah.
Just loud as fuck too. I love it. And then we come into later on. These guys are later on towards like 79 and 80 when they really caught on with the Clash and London Calling.
Mm-hmm.
Joe Strummer. I never got to see the Clash, but I did get to see Joe Strummer shortly before. Well, a couple years went by before he passed, but I got to see him with the Mescaleros, and I'm so happy that I got to see him.
Nice.
When he was still alive.
The Clash are one of those ones that, like, in the modern day, kind of gets underrated, but
they're so good. They're so good. Everything about them is good. A lot of like, it's weird. If you listen to a lot of punks, they're like, "Oh, Sandinista that album sucks," because they did all sorts of musical directions. You know what I mean? But they're just so good. They're excellent musicians. They've influences from all over.
I now know where Tim Burton got his look from.
It's awesome.
That looks like Tim Burton to me, man.
It does.
Young Tim Burton doesn't know. Maybe I should stay in art school or should I play in this band?
That's a great
My
picture,
question is, why not both? But no, like these guys caught on later in the decade and kind of shepherded the genre into the 80s when they kind of like the new, because it kind of blended the new wave and the OG punk sound in a lot of ways.
I would
Yep.
agree.
That
That's
a
why I
little bit
did
more
like
pop
the Clash as much.
influence, but
because-
they were still pretty hard in terms of their lyrical content. But like these guys were kind of the intersection point of like mainstream rock going into the 80s and punk.
Well, yeah, they were so good. They were such good musicians, but it was kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Inevitable that something was going to catch, like Rock the Casbah, which became like such a huge hit, you know.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of unfair that that's the only song they get recognized for now, because their
Because there's
early
such
stuff
good
has so
music.
much. Their early
Wait a
albums have so much good stuff on it.
Wait a
My
minute, they're the
favorite
same
Clash
band?
song is actually "Lost in the Supermarket," which is like
Yeah.
a totally random song. It's such a
I
good
can see
song.
that.
Wait, the band that did London Calling also does Rock the
Rock the
Casbah?
Casbah.
Yes, they
Yes.
do.
Fucking A.
That is the
Holy
Clash.
shit.
And only like a year or two later too.
So is that really punk?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. If you listen to other songs of theirs, like White Riot, like White Riot, I want to ride, White Riot, that's totally punk rock sounding. They have so
Yeah.
much different, like.
Then I've been deceived by the mass media because all I hear, because I never paid attention to the Clash, so all I would hear would be those two big hits, Rock the Casbah and London
And
Calling.
then this is the band Big Audio Dynamite that had a song called "The Globe." It was like "Situation Nowhere, Rush for a Change of Atmosphere." That was like the dudes. Yeah, there's so many different.
Yeah, they're one of those bands that kind of has a different sound depending on when you listen to them and what song you listen to. Because they can
It's
be
true.
a lot more like mainstream rock and roll. They can be very punk. Like it's kind of just depends on where you get them in their discography. But with that all being said, we've kind of come up to like 1980, which is about where I wanted to get to in this one. Because, you know, again, like we've been alluding to, in 1980, well, a whole new genre of music would kind of eclipse punk as like the hard edge of rock and roll, being thrash metal, which we'll get to eventually. But it was great having you guys on and doing this discussion, because it's a genre that, like we said, due to its deceased status in modern music, I think doesn't get enough attention these days for how good it was at its height.
I would agree with that because when I look at punk and I see, let me put it this way: when I look at grunge and I see how small that little era was, I see punk in it. But then I look at punk and then I contrast the two, and I'm like, punk's the way to go because punk is the normal mood behavior, and then grunge is the like super depressive episode.
Yeah, grunge is kind of like the super self-destructive part of the punk scene.
I would
Grunge
agree.
kind of took away all of the obnoxiousness from punk.
Yeah, I'll
And
say
they just
yeah,
did the stripped
I can see
down
that.
kind of like.
Did it and it made it more dour to me, which I didn't care for.
You know, I strongly disliked grunge when it first came out. Minus a couple bands like Mudhoney, because they had excellent, like they were punk, like their earlier like sub pop stuff. Like,
I think I've heard of
but
it. My brother
but you-
plays them a lot.
you've never heard of Mudhoney?
No, I haven't. But I think my brother had a girlfriend who he went to a concert with, and I think it was Mudhoney or some shit like
Yeah.
that.
And then like Soul Assassin saying like Alice in Chains, Soundgarden.
Those would be my two picks.
Those would be Alice in Chains for me. I'm not a big Soundgarden guy, but
I like Chris Cornell. I like Soundgarden wasn't that bad.
Soundgarden less so than
I'm
Living
not a pro
Incarnation
band
being
fan.
Audio Slave.
Yeah.
Audio Slave is great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Audio Slave is awesome.
And Chris
Soundgarden has
Cornell's
some good
voice
stuff too,
is
but-
great. You could see Chris Cornell actually singing some of the songs in Alice in Chains.
Yeah,
I don't give a fuck what anybody says. You could easily switch the two, and it
Oh
was
yeah,
good.
Lane Staley was amazing. Like,
yeah. Lane's like Alice in Chains is one of the few grunge bands I can, without reservation, say was actually a good band. They didn't just have a
but,
gimmick.
you know,
that was
when I go
popular
back
for
and
that
listen to a lot of it now, I like it. it was just one of those other things that kind of, it was a time for me, you know, where everything was just kind of being taken away, or like
But outside of those and some STP stuff that I do kind of dig, grunge was kind of that era of everything sucks. We're just going to do drugs about it,
I saw Stone Temple
rather than the punk attitude of everything fucking sucks. Let's go throw each other around for a while and have some fun.
Yeah, let's make fun of it. Like let's like kind of
and let's be super irreverent and make fun of everything.
I saw Stone Temple Pilots open up for the Butthole Surfers, and then they blew up after that.
Yeah, they were an interesting one too. I won't say they're like my favorite band, but they have some underrated stuff.
All these bands grew on me the older I got. At the time, I was like protesting. You know what I mean? I was I refused to like them.
and then when you kind of listen to them later, you're like, oh yeah, they were actually pretty good. But with all that being said, hopefully you'll join us next time on this little journey through the mists of time, where we cover the new wave of British heavy metal. So that should be some good stuff, because that's going into at least me and the Sentinel's favorite music of all.
Yummy! I can't wait.
I'll check in and watch that. Great
one. So hopefully you'll join us next time for that. Courtney, where can people find you?
Well, the link that the Sentinel posted up above, you can actually find me a lot more easily. If you look below my name here, it says it's Courtney 218. That's my tag. And if you put that in on YouTube, like at it's Courtney 218, then you can come up with that. And anybody that wants to see Stanley on guitar and Greg Hedson, who's in Circle Jerks and Bad Religion, and the bass player is in the Dickies, and then the drummer is from Goldfinger, which I'm not. Well, I can't say anything mean. And I'm singing. I only have 2 shorts on my channel, so you can't miss it. I'm singing a Joan Jett song. Actually, I'm singing "Bad Reputation."
Nice.
With them backing me, and it's a really
I've seen that clip. That was actually a really good clip.
That was so much fun to play with, like a good band behind me. Right? Because I don't sing. I'm not a singer. I just got up there and I was like, whatever. I didn't have a choice. They put me on the spot, and I was like, I turned to this person I didn't know. I went to the show by myself. I was like, "Can you film this?" Right. That was it. Forgot
I know you got some stuff going on, but hopefully you'll be getting back to making content here in the near future.
Absolutely.
But be sure to check his channel out. It's more of an eclectic mix of just really cool stuff and, you know, things he puts together, but he does a really good job with it. And obviously in the meantime, you can find him on here a lot for this show and our Sunday show, Rock and Roll Religion, because our interests align pretty well musically.
Yeah, we're biblically in like the same headspace. Basically, we worship at the altar of heavy metal.
Pretty much, particularly Judas Priest, as has been shown by my first Rumble exclusive I put up last weekend with Sentinel and 70s Rock Fan, and then our show that we did this last Sunday on Hellbent for Leather, which kind of has a punk tinge to it now that I come to think about it.
Yeah, I want to say on the metal and religious thing, I'd just say, metal is my religion, Judas is my priest.
Yeah, pretty much.
Cool. Nice.
But hopefully you guys will join us for that. I think this Sunday we are going to be covering. Actually, you know what? Maybe we'll go back into some Motorhead for part 2, because it's been like a year since I covered them, and I've been itching to talk some Motorhead. So maybe we'll.
I'm going to have to try and chime in, maybe from where I'm going to be out of town. Well, I'm going to just be up in the mountains, but.
We'll see. We'll see about that. Maybe we'll do that. Maybe we'll do something else. I'll see if something strikes me in the meantime, because that one's always been kind of a if I don't have a pre-planned idea for a show, I'll just go with whoever I'm listening to. I'm
just going to say bye really quick, because I gotta
absolutely.
Go. Yeah. Alice Cooper, So anyway, peace out, y'all. Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for joining.
Great. But absolutely be sure to go sub to Courtney. She's got a great channel, and she's just a great great personality to have around. I'm on It's Only Talk and Roll and Canon Film Club with her almost every week, whenever we do it, and that's always been a great time. That panel is awesome. You got me, Imperatus, Courtney, 70s Rock Fan, and then usually a couple of guests, usually Das Wolfen and Joe's Atmosphere, maybe some others. So hopefully you guys will join us for all of that. But with that all being out of the way, thank you guys so much for showing up, and thank you for, sitting here and listening to us ramble on about the music we love for a little over an hour. I know it's, late on a Thursday night, at least for me, so I got to get up and work in the morning, but I appreciate y'all hanging out, and until next time I see you, take care, stay safe. I love y'all, and I'll catch you next time.